Welcome to the Capital Light Assembly podcast brought to you by Edison Manufacturing and Engineering. Edison is your contract manufacturing partner focused on capital light assembly of complex mobility and energy products that are not well suited for highly automated production. Joined today by a special guest, Michael Robinet. Michael, thanks for coming on the podcast.
Hey, good day, Brandon.
Yeah, fun topic here, timely topic. So excited to explore some of your background, your expertise around this question. So one of the key questions for this podcast is how in the rapidly evolving mobility space, especially with electrification growing, how can companies with a hardware product effectively execute in here as the kind of the boundary conditions for manufacturing and supply have changed? And you have a specific article you wrote here that really caught my attention on the 4 strategic choices facing suppliers, but you have a ton of additional expertise and experience here. So I'm excited to explore this realm with you. Before we get there, would you mind setting the stage and just introducing yourself and a bit about the work you're doing?
Sure. So I've been active in the automotive industry. This is my 36th year, ever since basically 1988. Came from a family of auto workers, which for a lot of people out of Detroit is not uncommon. I grew up in the little town of Tecumseh, Ontario, Canada. And so, I had a father worked at Chrysler, grandfather worked at Chrysler, another grandfather worked at Ford. So a deep history and a love for the industry. And while I was going to school, I actually worked at Chrysler on the weekends as an arc welder. So, it's sitting behind a desk gives you a lot of appreciation for that kind of hard work. So like I said, I've been in the industry for many, many years. For the last 27, I've been either running a global vehicle production forecast, which is mainly used by suppliers, banking, sometimes OEMs. And then basically about 12 years ago, moved over to the consulting side. So I consult for mainly mid-size, larger suppliers. I also do a bit of work with economic development and some various sovereign countries. So it's really interesting work, and obviously the shift from ICE to BEV is going to be sort of that capper at the end of my career, where we try to help a lot of suppliers understand the new terrain that they're in and how to work through it. So that's a little bit about me. To answer your question, it's actually a sort of a longer answer, but I'll try to compartmentalize it and put it into some stages. Mm-hmm. We've known that battery electric's coming for some time. This is not the type of thing where people should be opening up the Wall Street Journal and realizing, oh my gosh, what's all this money being spent on battery cell plants and electrolyte plants and CAM and AM and separators and, all the different components needed for battery electric. And then obviously the making battery cases and battery boxes and all the, basically all the electronics and electrical content that goes into it. This should not be new to the industry. I think what has been kind of the topper that really has gained a lot more attention is the fact that the OEMs, and virtually everyone, by the way, has essentially said, I've got to join the party. And some have been leading the party, others have been fast followers, and others have been slow followers. But nonetheless, everybody knows where the party is, and they're headed to the party. So from that perspective, the supply base, interestingly enough, some have been really upfront and really, I would say, advanced in their thinking in terms of how they're going to add value in the new ecosystem, that new BEV ecosystem. And that's really critical going forward is how do you add value? That decision, to be honest, probably occurred 5, 6, 7 years ago, where they got the right people, the right alignment, the right relationships, the right technologies, and kind of went forward from there. For a supplier to kind of wake up today and realize, oh my gosh, I'm ICE only and I need to BEV, it may be too late, depending on who you are and what kind of technologies you have. Now, if you're, there's kind of 3 classifications. If you're BEV positive, great. Your stuff, your content, your systems flourish in a BEV environment. If you're BEV agnostic, maybe you don't care. Maybe you make something like seat foam or fabric or door panels where, your world is going to change a little bit, but not significantly. Or maybe you're BEV negative. Maybe you make throttle bodies, intake manifolds, camshafts, crankshafts, flywheels, clutches, whatever the case might be. You know what? Your world is kind of closing in. And so I think suppliers firstly need to define where they are and where they feel their ecosystem is going to go. There's a lot of other parameters that have to be considered here. And a couple of them are, is your ownership on board for all this new risk that the industry is going to have you taking on? That would be number one. So are you a family-run company? Are you part of private equity? Are you publicly run? All of those are big considerations. I think the other one is, do you have an aftermarket tail to you? So for instance, do you make a component that, is required in the aftermarket? Maybe your world is not as OE centric as you might think. And maybe you're not proliferating, or you haven't really fully, reviewed or taken advantage of the aftermarket for whatever your component or system is. So there's a whole bunch of check boxes that have to be taken in terms of figuring out where you are, how you are, and how do you play in this new space.
Yeah, I think thanks for that background. Definitely a complex space. I'm not sure necessarily the best way to ask this question, but I'm interested. So I think there's a core set of, the big tier one suppliers who, it seems like it's been obvious for some time, they already are deeply invested and shifting, and, they're making the obvious case that electrification is coming and they're preparing for it. But I think outside of, the big household names, there's two different areas where I think of like just adjacent areas. So one is, the lower downstream suppliers, how should they be thinking about it? And then there's also
Tier two, yep.
Yeah, and then there's also the question of, the niche suppliers, or the like for example, I was at an Indy for the work truck show, and so the medium duty space outside of core automotive, but talking to one of the leaders at one of the suppliers, and you say, yeah, you walk this floor and you think that all of these trucks are electrified, but no, everyone's built one or two of these. These are proof of concepts. No one knows what the volumes are going to look like, exactly when they're going to come. So like outside of that core, it's a bolt or electric, or kind of the core volumes, like how should companies just beyond the fold of like being right in the mix think about this?
Well, I think the fact that, and let's just kind of think about that. So let's say you are tier three or tier two, and you're not receiving production volumes directly from your OEM customer. But hopefully you've got a good relationship with your tier one customer, and I know a number of tier twos and tier threes that have a good relationship with their tier ones and are partnering with them. I'll give you an example. Let's say you're making, like I was saying earlier, maybe the aforementioned throttle body. Maybe you're not actually casting the throttle body. So you've got a casting source, and then you mill it, you machine it, you assemble it, make sure it's functional, it's your technology, but you're buying the casting. Maybe you're not, vertically integrated where you're doing that. Well, having a strong relationship with your casting supplier is probably a good idea, because he or she is just as impacted by this, if not more. And what we're getting at is, what we find is that, especially in automotive, tier two isn't someone like, I'm buying wire from Joe, and Joe also sends it to Boeing, and also sends it to Maytag, and also sends it to, John Deere. Usually Joe's providing wiring for mostly automotive. Mm-hmm. And so Joe needs to understand what's going on upstream, let me back up, downstream, in his space, because his world can change a lot. One of the things we talked to within the article I wrote, and I have a regular article in SE Automotive Engineering called Supplier Eye, where we investigate this literally every month. We take a different view of it, a different perspective, whatever the case might be. But I think what's really interesting is that, this past year, 2022, 96% of the vehicles made in North America had an engine, had a lump in the front, basically, as some people say. So that you might say, well, 96%. I'm not worried about the other four. But the issue is as we start to BEV, and I sort of turn that into a verb, as we start to BEV, suppliers can't wait till we're 70% ICE or 65 or 60% ICE. We can't wait that long. The problem is that we are a capital intensive business, and I know that the article or the title of your podcast is Capital Light, but unfortunately there's a lot of suppliers that are capital intensive, and fixed costs is everything. Covering those fixed costs is everything. Tooling, machinery, your infrastructure, whatever the case might be. And unfortunately, a lot of it is just, it's not service based. We're making stuff for lack of a better word. As we scrub that volume down, we go from 96 to 90 to 85 to 80. We subscribe that even at 85 or 80, if you take everybody's capitalization and you drop it down 10 or 15 points, that is the difference for a lot of suppliers between profitability and losing money, or as we say, taping dollars to the side of every part as it goes out the door. And what's interesting in this whole process is that in some respects, it's not going to be the family-run company where, maybe the patriarch father or maybe the mother or whatever comes to the son or the daughter that's running the company and says, hey, we're losing money. What gives here? It's usually the bank. The bank's going to basically knock on your door and say, you've hit your line of credit. You've snapped a couple covenants. We don't like your future portfolio in terms of the fact that it's ICE only, and you really don't have much of a strategy in terms of how you're going to survive in an ICE only environment. So I digress a little bit, but the key here is that we can't wait till 2027, 2028 to cry uncle. The uncle crying actually is going to start. It's already started. There are several suppliers in distress right now. There are going to be more. And frankly, as we BEV further in 24 and 25 and 26, this will become even more of an issue.
That's a really interesting point you just made. And so the common pushback you'll get is, people saying, hey, we can't shift to all electric because of grid issues or for whatever materials issue on the battery side. And so, I don't believe the forecast of it's going to be all BEV by 2030 or 2035 or pick your date. But if I understand the point that you just made, is like, that's not really a relevant question, because all we need is 10, 15, 20% uptake in the industry. And that fundamentally changes the financials for several of these downstream suppliers.
I think to your point, if I had a nickel for every supplier that came to me and said, well, I'm gonna withstand this shift and I'll be the last, quote unquote, last man standing. Everybody can't be the last man standing. Someone's going to have to give, because if you all want to be the last man standing, that means that all your capitalization will suffer. You'll have to all consolidate at the same rate. We all know that that's not possible. And it's interesting, as we BEV, we're going to donut hole. We call it donut holing. And what's going to happen is that we've started out BEVing on the edges. We've done luxury product. We've done obviously things like vehicles like Hummers and F-150s, and we got Silverados coming, and we got Ram Revs coming. So really higher end, full size pickups. And again, I won't call it a niche, but let's call it for what it is. And then we're doing some performance vehicles. There's a lot of activity in performance, smaller performance vehicles, and that's really where we've BEV'd. The real volume in the market is in the middle. The volume is in C segment, D segment crossover utilities. And when they start to BEV hard in terms of taking away from ICE and moving over to BEV, that's when the suppliers are going to start to feel it. So to this point, it's been, oh, yeah, we feel it a little bit. It's not a big deal. My ICE volumes are fine. And you see OEMs continue to reinvest in ICE because they have to, by the way, at least for the next cycle or two, to afford to move over to BEV. We all know that equation. But as clients come to us and say, when are we going to start to feel it? You're going to start to feel it when plants like GM Spring Hill and the new Orion plant and, Stellantis over in Windsor. And when those plants start shifting over to battery electric, those are substantial facilities. And then real volume starts to shift from ICE to BEV.
And so I imagine the tactics vary fairly widely based on the specific situation. But do you have a strategic framework that you might recommend? And so, like this dichotomy, right? Of yeah, volumes are coming. The volumes are running away from you at a pace that there's going to be a problem here if isn't already relatively soon. At the same time, there isn't the volume in the electrification space that allows you to really invest and ramp up and deploy capital and make money in the short term here. So like how should suppliers, especially the lower tier ones, think about trying to navigate and come out on the other side, mitigate risk, all of these types of things?
Well, I mean, I wouldn't. It's not an easy process, but if we want to take a look at some of the key factors or activities that need to occur, let's work through them. I think the first one is, as an ownership team, your ownership needs to understand: are you in this for the long run, or are you BEV risk averse? Are you willing to take on risk, a little bit more risk than you have in the organization? Understanding what your competitors are doing. I mean, really getting a feel for what are we going to be in 10 years? And I know that people say that all the time, but in this case, it's really important because, in 10 years time, and our forecast, I would say, is not nor aggressive nor conservative. I would say, I guess as a forecaster, we always say we're right. I mean, I hope nobody from my company is listening, but forecasts are always, in some respects, going to be wrong. It's just how you explain your assumption sets, and how much of that from a bridge perspective is taking place. But essentially, we as a company at S&P Global Mobility, we feel that basically the market's going to be about 45% battery electric by 2030. Okay, so if we set that marker out there, and let's just say there's a positive and a negative. Let's say, there's a couple of OEMs that feel it's going to be stronger. A couple of OEMs feel it's going to be lighter. Whatever the case might be, let's say we're at 60 on the high end and 35 on the low end. That still means 65% of the market is going to move in that general direction. So, again, so understanding in 10 years, how are you going to exist in that space? What are your key competitors going to do? What technologies are going to be able to add value at that point? Through this whole process, and we talked a little bit about it in the article, the OEMs are insourcing significantly. We're even hearing that where there's problem suppliers and OEMs feel, and maybe even key tier ones with their tier twos, that they feel these suppliers are so core, I can't let them go under, number one. Number two, they're so critical to my business, I got to buy them. So this is another concept that, frankly, hasn't even been fathomed in the industry, is that, yes, we're insourced. Some of it is the unions tapping the OEMs on the shoulder and say, hey, we've got engine plants possibly closing. We've got transmission plants closing. What are you going to do for me? And so there's a little bit of that going on, but there's also, the OEMs looking at their supply base and saying, this one is so strategic, I have to do something about it. I can't let it go. I can't let it go by the wayside and have to resource all that work. So anyways, I think the insourcing part is important. What does the ownership team want to do? What technology portfolio do you have? Do you have the right people? Do you have the right infrastructure for where you want to be? And after that kind of, that might take a month or two to figure out where you want to be. That supplier might say, you know what? Not for me. Too much risk. I feel that my competitor's way ahead of me. I just don't feel that we're going to have a value-added equation where we'll be able to make the same kind of margins that we're making today. So then some alternative, one of the four choices, as we talked about in the article, have to occur.
Yeah, and that makes a lot of sense. I think that's a good place to probably leave this too. I'll link to the article that we've been referring to here. So if you're listening and you want to read that, I think that's a good place. But yeah, Michael, this is very complex topic. Lots that goes in here. But I really appreciate the thoughts, the way you frame this question and this situation, and the work you're doing to try to help companies and individuals kind of find the right path through here.
Yeah, there's a lot of great suppliers out there, and for good or for bad, some of us just love the supply base. Others are more attuned to retail or OEMs or aftermarket. But there's been so much great innovation. Our industry would be nowhere without the innovation and the the courage sometimes from the supply base to take a risk and go out there. So we want to see many of them survive. There's going to be some new players coming in, but nonetheless, the the new ecosystem is going to be significantly different than the one that we're staring at right now.
Yeah, makes a lot of sense. Well, thank you, Michael. Really appreciate it again, and best of luck to you.
Thank you so much. Have a great day.
Thanks.